and welcome back to Inktober. I'm your host, Samia, and today I'm showing you some process footage of what I did for actually Inktober Day 12's prompt, which was Solar Witch, and I wanted to create a piece that had a lot of luminescence. So today I thought I would talk to you guys a little bit about how to use colored inks and ink washes and layer them to create like a glowing effect. And during Inktober, some people don't really believe in using color, even if it's colored inks. Some people don't like that because it's very similar to watercolor. But I feel like with such fun prompts, sometimes you need a little something. So I specifically use a couple different colors. I use my sepia tone inks for starters. I use sepia tone fine liners by Copic. Then I use a sepia tone ink brush pen. I use a Copic marker just for the skin tone because I kind of just wanted to lay that in there. And then I use my red and magenta inks and I mix them together for a very thin, like pinky peachy wash. Sorry. And then I use my yellow ink and I make a wash out of that as well. So I wanted this piece to feel very, very warm. She is a solar witch. I wasn't having a lot of inspiration when I was drawing this, to be quite honest. It was a tough night. I was having a kind of a rough week, and I was getting really stuck for what to draw. And even though I had the prompt, I was like, this prompt is so cool. I should be able to do something way more interesting than this. And yet I couldn't, quite honestly. But what I usually do when I get into a funk, but I know that I need to draw, I just need to draw, is I actually go to my Pinterest and I look at photos of models, I look at photos of fashion and things like that, and I looked up some photos of female fashion in nature because I thought maybe getting something kind of sunlit, outdoorsy. I just wanted something to spark me, and I came across this model. She had this beautiful wavy hair. She had this really big floppy hat that I decided to add little dangling light balls to. And the image itself was very full of light, and you could kind of see the underside of her hair glowing from the sun behind her in this image. So I took inspiration from that and used it for my own stylistic purposes. I drew the portrait, kind of in more my style, but, staying true to the shape of everything. Really trying to get the anatomy of the face right. Could have done maybe a little bit better on the lips and the nose, but learning process. So then instead of fine lining everything before starting with the ink, I sort of went back and forth on ink washes. So you'll see that I outlined a couple strands of hair, and then I used my sepia brush pen and I used some water on a brush to create a gradient, because the sepia brush pen I have, it's an ink dye in it, and dyes are water soluble, meaning that you can spread them with water more easily and they get reactivated with water. So this is kind of what inspired me to go the loose wash route with this. So I have 4 Copic fine liners. They're in sizes 0.05, 0.1, 1.0, 3.0, and 5.0. So that's smallest to largest. And I used them in varying weights, meaning that on the underside of some of the strands of hair, I make the lines a little bit thicker. I go back with a bigger pen if I haven't done it already. I make the lines a little bit thicker, and then I use the thinner lines to create sort of those nice wispy edges for the top chunks of hair, so that where the shadow is, you'll see a bit more of an outline. And then I started to go in with my ink wash, and I just layered in very, very light pink. And this is, keep in mind, this is mostly water with a drop or two of pink ink. And you can see the bottles I used in there. They're just the Higgins colored dyes, because that's what I have around, colored inks. And I let the pink and the sepia tone brush sort of mix a bit because I wanted it to be very muted. I didn't want this to be bright pink hair. I kind of wanted a peachy rose gold effect that would go with the yellow that I put in later. So that's what I was going for with that. So I put in some washes, I let them dry for a bit, and then in some of the areas after they dry, then I outline the hair a little bit more. I sort of kept building up the outlines of the strands. I had them all there in pencils, but instead of outlining everything perfectly and then filling it in, I kind of just switched back and forth, and sometimes I just like doing that because I do find that, especially when it comes to ink washes, you don't always need a ton of outlining, and sometimes over outlining things can make them appear flatter. But I do like adding in sort of those thicker outlines where one chunk is pulling away from the other. So you'll see that I have some very thick outlines on chunks of hair on like the lower part of her hair, or like where it's over her face. And that's because I do that to imply that the shape is coming forward, so that it pulls forward and everything else looks like it's behind it. And this is a really effective way of using line weight to create form, which is something that, as I said before, I wanted to work on more in Inktober. For her lips, I used a bit of a heavier red and magenta mixed ink, but I left some space in the middle to put some water, and that let me get a little bit of a gradient. And then I outlined some of her hair with the ink brush so that I could go back later and get more brown mixing with the pink. I loved these little these little round light balls that I'm coloring in yellow. They just made me really happy. They gave it that brightness, and they framed her face, and I thought it would be an interesting idea to put with the hat. And then I used a little bit of the yellow next to the sepia tone, and you see that it does reactivate the sepia tone and then mixes with it. So I used that to my advantage, so that I would get those muted colors, and it worked really well with the pink especially. I really liked that because I wanted it to look a little bit more natural, but I wanted to be careful as I went, because when you're layering washes, this goes for watercolor too, of course, you can start light and you can go darker, but once you go dark, you can never really lighten up areas anymore unless you can lift it. And with inks, they stain the paper way more easily than watercolors do, so the chances of being able to lift any of the color and get a lighter tone there is very slim once it dries. If you do it while it's still wet, you might get it mostly up, but it really depends on the ink and the paper. So for where her highlights are, I put in some more yellow. I thought it would just be fun to have the highlights be mostly yellow instead of white. And then I outlined her hat with the sepia tone pens and used the brush pen. And I let the brown of the brush pen be the color of the hat, basically. And I really liked how warm and earthy that felt against the rose gold and the yellow. I outlined the light balls because some of them did get lost in her hair, and I wanted some of them to look like they were really in the front and hanging in front of her face, so I just gave them a little outline. I used my thinner pens for that. And sorry, I did lose some of the footage where I was finishing off the hair, but it was mostly done by the time it cut out. So if you have any questions, because it skipped over a little bit, please let me know. All you really missed was me adding a bit more wash to the underside of her hair to get that color a bit richer and to get those browns a bit more in there, but it's basically what you saw, it's just more of the same. I used a thin brush and some ink to do these tattoos on her arm and on her neck. I've never really done tattoos on a portrait before, and a lot of artists just kind of do them as an added element, so I wanted to try it. And using the red ink and not having sharp lines really worked for it because they look very gentle. They look like they're maybe tattoos she's had for a while. And I just really like that they didn't flatten out the image, because that was my fear, was that if I put these elements on her skin, they wouldn't look like they were wrapping around her form. If you'd like to see more Inktober posts, please follow me on Instagram. It's @SamiaCeline. I'm also on Twitter as RiotCeline. Those links are in the description below. And until next time, have a great day. Keep drawing. We're almost through Inktober. Bye!